Welcome to War and Untold Stories. Here we explore the hidden side of history. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Imagine a tropical paradise just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Now picture it as the setting for one of the most audacious and disastrous covert operations in modern history. April 1961. The world held its breath as a secret army, backed by the might of the CIA, prepared to strike. Their target? Fidel Castro and his fledgling communist government in Cuba. The mission, known as the Bay of Pigs invasion, was designed to be a swift, surgical strike to overthrow a regime the U.S. saw as a dangerous threat. But instead of a triumphant victory, it spiraled into a spectacular failure. A political firestorm that would not only humiliate a young American president, but also push the world to the very brink of nuclear war. This is the story of how a seemingly perfect plan became one of America's biggest political embarrassments, a cautionary tale of ambition, miscalculation, and unintended consequences. To understand why the CIA was so determined to remove Fidel Castro, we have to rewind to 1959. Cuba was a playground for the rich and a nation suffering under the corrupt dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. Then came a charismatic revolutionary, Fidel Castro, who swept to power on a wave of popular support, promising freedom, democracy, and an end to corruption. Initially, Washington was cautiously optimistic, but the mood soured quickly. Castro's government began nationalizing American-owned businesses and land. Even more alarming, he started cozying up to the Soviet Union. The Cold War was at its peak, and the idea of a Soviet-aligned communist state so close to American shores was Washington's worst nightmare. The domino theory was in full effect. If Cuba fell, who was next? The Eisenhower administration decided that Castro had to go, setting in motion a plan that his successor, John F. Kennedy, would inherit and ultimately execute. The CIA was tasked with the mission, and they developed a plan codenamed Operation Zapata. It was ambitious, secretive, and, in their eyes, foolproof. The agency recruited around 1,400 Cuban exiles who had fled Castro's regime, forming a paramilitary group known as Brigade 2506. Deep in the jungles of Guatemala, these men were trained in guerrilla warfare, amphibious assaults, and sabotage. The strategy seemed straightforward. The brigade would land on a remote beach on Cuba's southern coast, the Bahia de Cochinos, or Bay of Pigs. This spot was chosen because it was isolated and had a nearby airfield. The invaders would establish a beachhead, secure the airfield, and announce a provisional government. The CIA firmly believed that this act would ignite a massive popular uprising across Cuba. The Cuban people, they thought, were just waiting for a spark to rise up against Castro. But this assumption, born from overconfidence and flawed intelligence, would prove to be the mission's fatal flaw. In the pre-dawn hours of April 15, 1961, the operation began, not with a landing, but with an airstrike. 8 B-26 bombers, painted to look like Cuban Air Force planes, took off from Nicaragua to destroy Castro's air power on the ground. The element of surprise was critical. However, the strike was a partial failure. They only managed to destroy a few of Castro's planes, leaving his air force mostly intact. Worse, the world immediately saw through the disguise. News reports exposed the U.S. connection, shattering the illusion of a purely Cuban-led revolt. Despite this major setback, President Kennedy, facing immense pressure, gave the final green light for the invasion. On the night of April 17th, the men of Brigade 2506 began their journey ashore. But as their boats approached the Bay of Pigs, they encountered razor-sharp coral reefs that the CIA's maps had somehow missed. Boats were sunk, supplies were lost, and the element of surprise was gone. The chaotic landing was just the beginning of their nightmare. Fidel Castro was not caught off guard. Thanks to his own intelligence network, he knew an invasion was coming, though not exactly where or when. The moment the first bombs fell, he mobilized his entire military. As Brigade 2506 struggled to establish a foothold on the beaches, they were met with overwhelming force. Castro's army, numbering in the tens of thousands, descended on the Bay of Pigs. Crucially, Castro's surviving air force took to the skies, sinking two of the invaders' main supply ships, which carried most of their ammunition and communication equipment. The exiles were now stranded, outgunned, and completely cut off. The promised popular uprising never happened. Instead, Cuban citizens rallied behind Castro, viewing the invasion as an attack by American imperialists. Within 72 hours, it was all over. The CIA's meticulously planned operation was crushed. Over 100 members of the brigade were killed in action, and nearly 200 were captured. The dream of a free Cuba had dissolved on the bloody sands of the Bay of Pigs. Back in Washington, the mood was grim. The news of the swift and total defeat was a devastating blow to the Kennedy administration, which was not even 100 days old. The failure was public, undeniable, and deeply humiliating for the United States on the global stage. President Kennedy, who had inherited the plan but authorized its execution, chose not to deflect blame. In a televised address to the nation, he famously declared, "Victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan," and took full responsibility for the disaster. The fallout was immense. The failed invasion solidified Castro's power, turning him into a national hero who had stood up to the mighty United States and won. More dangerously, it pushed Cuba directly into the arms of the Soviet Union. Seeking protection from future U.S. aggression, Castro allowed the Soviets to place nuclear missiles on the island, a decision that would lead the world to the edge of annihilation during the Cuban Missile Crisis just 1 year later. The captured members of Brigade 2506 languished in Cuban prisons for nearly 2 years. Their freedom was eventually negotiated by the Kennedy administration in exchange for $53 million worth of baby food and medicine. The Bay of Pigs invasion left a long and complicated legacy. For the CIA, it was a moment of profound failure that led to major internal reforms and a reevaluation of its covert action capabilities. For U.S.-Cuba relations, it created a chasm of mistrust and hostility that would last for decades, defining the two nations' interactions throughout the Cold War and beyond. For Fidel Castro, it was the ultimate propaganda victory, cementing his grip on power and his status as a revolutionary icon who had successfully defied a superpower. The invasion became a powerful symbol, a lesson in the dangers of poor intelligence, political hubris, and the unpredictable nature of war. From the secret training camps in Guatemala to the tense deliberations in the White House, the story of the Bay of Pigs is a gripping chapter of Cold War history. It serves as a stark reminder that even the most powerful nations are not immune to catastrophic misjudgment. The echoes of those 72 hours in April 1961 can still be felt today, shaping the complex relationship between the United States and Cuba. One failed operation, one flawed plan, and a cascade of consequences that changed the course of history forever. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. See you next time.